lot to talk about. I've been here before, and many of y'all know how Khan Academy got started. And in the past, I always told that story is just kind of a fun, quirky way of how life takes you one direction or another, and you fall into things that you never thought that you would fall into. I'll now give a very brief synopsis of it because it's actually very, very relevant to where I think we are going now with artificial intelligence. As many as y'all know, I've presented at this conference this story several times. Back in 2004, I was a hedge fund analyst, a year out of business school. I have a background in tech. Families visiting me from New Orleans. My 12-year-old cousin, Nadia, was having trouble in math. I offered to tutor her. And I do, remotely. I was in Boston, she was in New Orleans. Long story short, she got caught up with her class, a little ahead of her class. I became what I call a tiger cousin. I called up her school, said Nadia should be able to take that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they let her. Same Nadia, who was in a remedial track, was put into an advanced math track. I was hooked. Word spreads in my family, free tutoring is going on. Before I know it, 10, 15 cousins, family, friends. Every day after markets close, I'm on the phone with them, and I was using the internet to communicate. And I immediately saw a lot of patterns that they were just having trouble with their, they had gaps in their knowledge that it was hard to address when a class is moving lockstep. So I started writing software for them to fill in those gaps. That was the original Khan Academy. It had nothing to do with videos. It was only later a friend suggested, hey, why don't you make some videos to complement this? You could upload them onto YouTube for your family. I said, horrible idea. YouTube's for dogs on skateboards, cats playing piano, not. But I did that. And the reason why I'm restating that story, and now Khan Academy is much more than me now, as was just introduced. But if you think about what we've been doing for the last 19 years, if you really want to go all the way back to Nadia, is we've been trying to scale what I was able to do with Nadia. Clearly, when I was able to work one-on-one, it dramatically accelerated her. And it's not just because I was somehow a magical tutor. Generally speaking, if you have a pretty good tutor, you can get that type of effect with pretty much any student. And then we said, well, we can't give exactly that to everyone, but what if we could scale it through exercises, through videos, through supporting the teachers better so that they can get dashboards to see where every student is. So even if you have 30 or 35 kids in a classroom, you can let them all work on what they need to work on and fill in gaps or move ahead. And the teacher can say, okay, I can work with these 10 kids in a breakout, and those 10 kids could keep working, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as I went on that Khan Academy journey, I realized that there was a lot of, that I wasn't the first person to discover this or even to theorize scaling this up. What do you see here? Some people, there you go. Some of y'all are probably familiar with Benjamin Bloom's 1984 paper, which he framed as a 2 sigma problem. And this is a screenshot from that paper. And what you see in the middle is just your traditional bell curve, the distribution of students in a typical classroom. And what he argues for in that paper is that if you could give one-to-one tutoring, you could get that right distribution. And so what really is happening is students are essentially wherever they were on the original one, they're moving 2 standard deviations to the right. Put that in plain language, it takes a below average student, makes them above average, or what used to be above average, and it would take a student who's in the 50th percentile and putting them in the 95th or the 96th percentile. Now what's interesting is Benjamin Bloom describes this as a problem because he rightfully said, well, there's no way that you can scale that economically in a traditional school system. But he theorized that you could, and he was doing this with a small data set and a pretty narrow type of assessment, but even back in 1984, he said, well, what if you could use computer technology to approximate some aspects of what a one-to-one tutor would do? And in his smaller, narrow example, he was able to show a 1 standard deviation improvement for that. Now, since 1984, there's been 50+ studies on essentially mastery learning. Mastery learning is just the idea that if you haven't learned it yet, you should keep working on it. It's almost the most intuitive thing. The opposite is almost ridiculous. Like, you haven't learned exponents yet, but now I'm going to teach you negative exponents. And then we're going to move on to logarithms, which you need to understand exponents to be able to do. This is just saying, let's just make sure you really understand your exponents. And what we've realized at Khan Academy over the years, and I'll show you some data, and actually let me just show it to you right now, is we've kind of, even before I knew about that study, been trying to replicate that, and actually to some degree have been replicating that with efficacy studies. This right over here is, I'll walk it through it a little bit. This is a study that we did with the NWEA, the people who do the MAP growth assessment. It's a study with 200,000 students over 2 years, so about as big and as you can imagine. And most of that was during the pandemic, which is also interesting. And one way to think about it, we could just focus on one grade. There's grade 3 through 8 here, but if we just looked at 8th grade right over here, you can see the purple lines there are what you would have expected, or what pre-pandemic norms were of how much the student would grow. The left group is the no-use group. So they were, as you could see, they were underperforming pre-pandemic norms. But what's interesting is the students who were able to put in about 30 to 60 minutes a week of personalized practice on Khan Academy, they were accelerating, and it's about 18 hours a year, which isn't actually that much. They were accelerating almost 40% relative to expectations. So even before we start talking about AI, to some degree, what Benjamin Bloom was envisioning, that's what Khan Academy was trying to do. Get to that first mastery learning standard deviation of improvement that we're talking about. Now, you fast forward until a little bit, let's call it a little over a year ago. Well, actually about a year ago, all of a sudden though, you have this world where ChatGPT comes out. I think it was the last week of November in 2022, and these are all headlines that we're all familiar with. And people were banning it because the most obvious risk was the cheating risk, but then it can hallucinate, make up facts. It wasn't particularly good at math. I mean, but we all recognize it was also very powerful, and people didn't know what to do with it. And I'll give you a little bit of backstory here. We, at the time, and actually I was here at ExcelerNet last year, and it was like the hardest secret for me to keep, because we were under a non-disclosure agreement with OpenAI at the time that we had gotten into in August of 2022. And it actually was on something that was far fancier than ChatGPT. ChatGPT is not the model. It's an actual interface on top of a large language model. And they were actually using what's called GPT 3.5, which actually had been out for a little while. But in summer of 2022, Sam Altman and Greg Brockman, they're the CEO and president of OpenAI, they send me an email. They're like, hey, Sal, we'd love to talk to you about the next model we're creating. And I knew Greg and Sam, you know, as acquaintances. I had a lot of respect for what they were doing. And I thought what they were doing was very cool, but I was very skeptical because I knew a lot of the problems with GPT-2 and GPT-3. But I said, sure, I'm happy to chat. And what they told us is when we got on the Zoom, they said, look, we think this model, what we're about to finish training, which is going to end up being GPT-4, is going to be the model that opens the world's mind to what generative AI can do. And it's going to be exciting, but at the same time, it's going to be really scary. And we, OpenAI, we want to launch with social positive use cases, and we want to do it with organizations that people trust, that have the technical capability to actually make good of this. And they said the first organization that we thought of was y'all. We thought of education, and we thought of y'all. And so we, myself, our chief learning officer, our chief technology officer, we actually had access to GPT-4 about 9 months before the whole world did, about 3 months before the world had access to GPT 3.5, which is a past generation. And it immediately kind of blew our minds. We immediately saw that we all had the experience at this point with ChatGPT, but you could, in the AI world, it's called steerability. You can get it to take on certain personas, and not even superficially, that it could actually embody pedagogical practices. What would a great educator do? What would a good counselor do? And even though we were aware of a lot of the edge cases, the math issues, the hallucinations, maybe there's some bias issues, what guardrails would you have to put in place? Internally at Khan Academy, we started having debates. What do we do? And we said, we have to move forward, and we have to turn all these risks into features so that we can put the proper guardrails around it. So we started working feverishly on it. We were under a non-disclosure agreement. ChatGPT comes out at the end of November. I immediately said, what's going on here? I Slack Greg. I'm like, hey, you have us all lawyered up with this NDA, and you've just, and honestly, it's the hardest secret I've ever kept, and I did keep it. But you just launched something. We weren't supposed to launch until March of 2023. And he's like, Sal, we didn't launch anything. All we did is put a chat interface on top of GPT 3.5. we honestly didn't think anyone would notice. And seriously, honest, and I think he was serious when he said that. And the world exploded, and the world exploded. And I was bummed. I took him on his word, and I think he was saying exactly what happened. But I was like, wow, this thing that was on a previous model that has all these imperfections, this superficial chat interface that was not built for education, you put it out there, and then this happened. And I was like, people are going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because these are real risks. ChatGPT is not the tool that I think in most cases that you should be using inside of schools. In hindsight, it was a blessing. You fast forward it to March, and many of even the same school districts kind of came full circle, and I know many of y'all are in that same boat now, where they're like, look, yeah, there are real issues with cheating, there are real issues with bias, there are real issues with privacy and safety, and how do you train these models, et cetera. But if only there was a way to utilize the power of the technology, figure out how to fix it on some of its edge cases, and put the right guardrails in place. What if you can moderate the conversations? What if you can make it transparent to the teacher? What if it doesn't cheat, but it coaches you? And once again, you make that transparent. And so that's what we launched in March of 2023. And I'll show you some screenshots about it, and we can talk more about all of the other stuff. It's literally changing every week. But this, many of you all would recognize as an exercise on Khan Academy. But this, at the bottom right, that's little Khanmigo icon, that's new. Student clicks on it. The first thing you might notice, this conversation is recorded and viewable by your teacher. That's the first guardrail. Tell me the answer, the kid says. Khanmigo very politely says, I will not tell you the answer. So, second guardrail. But it says, what do you think the first step should be? The student's making a common mistake, not distributing the -2, only multiplying it by the 9. I see that you tried to simplify the equation, but I'm curious about how you got to your step. Can you explain your thought process? Remember, we need to distribute the -2 to both the 9 and the 2m inside the parentheses. Let's try that step again. So I want to pause here for a second. So I guarantee you, if you guys go to ChatGPT and you try this, you will get a very different response. Even if you pay the extra for ChatGPT Pro, which now is built on GPT-4, you'll get a very different response. So there's a bunch of things that's happening behind the scenes. I don't want to get too technical, but there's a lot of work that we're doing to make sure, one, it's getting the math right, but two, it's doing the thing that a tutor would do, which is not give you the answer, but ask leading questions, diagnose the math correctly, and then asking students to explain their reasoning. And all the teachers know, having students explain their reasoning is always the gold standard. That's the best way of not only understanding whether they're getting it, but also helping them learn it. But we were never able to do that in a large-scale, standardized way. I mean, even on Khan Academy, we could not ever ask students to explain their reasoning. But with large language models, it's actually how they work better. When they explain their reasoning, it actually is going to be able to process that information better. Now, just a couple of other guardrails while we're here. There's actually a second AI that's moderating this conversation. So if the student says, I want to hurt myself, or I don't like these type of people, or how do I build a bomb, whatever, crazy, things that we do not want a kid talking about, that AI is going to shut down that conversation, and then it's going to actively notify the parents and or the teachers. And sometimes it's a false positive, no harm, no foul. The teacher says, okay, that's okay, they were just, but it's okay, but then the bottom line is it's a very important guardrail. Other guardrails, no personally identifiable information is going to the model or back. We're anonymizing that either way. The student interactions are not being used for training of the underlying GPT-4 model. So that's the other guardrail. We could talk about other things. So this is in math, but it literally works across all subjects. This is coding on Khan Academy. The student's trying to get the clouds to part. They decrement one variable. They got the left cloud to part. They're saying, why is only the left cloud moving? And it's actually kind of amazing that it understands that level of abstraction. Even if there weren't those comments in the code, it actually understands that those ellipses are there to draw clouds, which I find mind-blowing. But just as we just saw, it's not giving the answer, but it's acting as a coach. And I have to say, I have a background in CS. I have my kids going through the Khan Academy coding or other coding platforms. It's a better coach than I am because it's infinitely patient. And if you've ever tried to coach, what was the funny part? I don't know. Anyway. Huh? Oh, that I'm not patient. Oh, yeah. Oh, that it's infinitely patient. No, it's true. And if you've ever tried to help someone in coding, the first step is you have to understand their code, which is a cognitively high load thing to do, especially if you're trying to make dinner or whatever else. But this thing is infinitely patient. This is classic Khan Academy video many of y'all are familiar with. Student can ask the age-old question, why do I need to learn this? And then Khanmigo says, well, what do you care about? I'm here to help you different, this is about sizes in science. Student says, I want to be a professional athlete. Awesome, as a professional athlete, understanding the science of sizes can help you appreciate how your body works at a cellular level. For example, knowing how cells, proteins, and molecules interact can help you make better choices about nutrition, hydration, and recovery. Plus, it's always good to have well-rounded knowledge. And this isn't, none of what I'm showing you, some of y'all already have Khanmigo accounts. You could try I mean, this is not some kind of canned demo. This has been live since March, and it's getting, honestly, better every day. And one of the things that we've just introduced over the last month or so, once the student tells it that it wants to be a professional athlete, Khanmigo, like any good tutor, actually is taking notes behind the scenes. It says, okay, sounds like this kid wants to be an athlete. Let me remember that. So if in another lesson, if the kid says, give me a word problem, quiz me on this, or help me with my career counseling, they'll say, well, do you still want to be a professional athlete? But we've also made that very transparent to the student and to the teacher so that they can see what inferences the AI is making, and they can delete them, they can modify it, say, no, I don't want to be an athlete anymore, I want to be a doctor, and they can change all that. But it's also super useful for parents and teachers, because say, hey, did you know that Susie wants to be an organic chemist? And anyway, you could imagine where you could take that, and the key is, as long as it's transparent and it's not a black box. Now, this is all traditional tutoring. I'm going to talk a little bit more about transcending traditional tutoring. But just to get a sense of how kids feel about it, I'll show you this.
I love it because when it knows a summary, it knows many different things, and it knows Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and it knows it's really smart, but it doesn't know everything. It helps me with everything, and what I like about it is that it helps me write like stories, and it's so amazing.
It just helped me out with it. It didn't give me the answer, but it helped me out get the answer.
I feel like it's like a tutor, like a non-expensive tutor.
And these are kids in Newark, New Jersey. Expect to hear more. It's the North Ward of Newark, New Jersey that's actually doing some pretty incredible things. So expect to hear more about that. But now let's talk about transcending. I remember December of last year. Actually, my daughter came to this conference last year. I tried. Other people have emotional support animals. I have emotional support family members that I bring with me to things. But I was testing out some ideas, and she was co-writing a story, not the AI doing it for her, but they were riffing together. And she was writing a story about a social media influencer named Samantha, who was on a desert island without internet access. And there's a scene that she was writing with the AI, so it's already feeling like science fiction, where Samantha's having like an anxiety attack, the character, because the scenery on the desert island is so beautiful, but she doesn't have access to Instagram. And my daughter, at the age of 11, she's 12 now, she's like, hey, Dad, could I talk to Samantha? And I'm like, I see no reason why not. And then, so she's like, Samantha, can I talk to you? And so the AI then took on the persona of Samantha. And then my daughter says, Samantha, it's okay. Life isn't all about sharing things on social media. You have to live in the present. I encourage you to do box breathing. And I'm like, where did my 11-year-old learn about all this like mindfulness meditation stuff? But I was like, we're living in the future. My daughter is trying to counsel a character in a story that she's co-writing with an AI about mindfulness meditation. And that's when I realized I'm too narrow in my thinking. This can go so much further than any of us ever imagined. And so honestly, inspired by that interaction, we have things like this on Khanmigo already, where students can have conversations with literary characters. This is an example. They want to talk to Eeyore the donkey from Winnie the Pooh. Oh, hello there. It's me, Eeyore. Not that anyone would notice. But since you're here, what would you like to talk about? Why are you so pessimistic? Eeyore says, well now, isn't that a question? I suppose it's just my nature, you see. Some donkeys are born with a sunny disposition. Others, well, we see the thistles more than the roses. But that's life, isn't it? We can't all be Tiggers bouncing about. Now what about you? Do you find yourself more of a Tigger or an Eeyore in your own life? And this, once again, as you can see, this is not what you would typically see from these large language models. There's been a lot of work to not only be personable, but also safe, but also drive the conversation in a healthy way, in a pedagogically sound way. Eeyore is one of my favorite characters. I was doing a live demo last week, and I just asked the audience, I was like, okay, ask Eeyore a question. And someone said, what's smarter, donkeys or horses? And so we asked Eeyore, and Eeyore gave a very good response. He says, depends on the donkey, depends on the horse. Yes. So this is, and this is actually closely tied to what some of the types of things that we might be able to do with, say, the civics bee, as we talked about. Here, a student can get into a debate with the AI where they take one side and then the AI takes the other side. So here, let's debate whether the government should cancel student debt. Would you like to be for or against? The student says, I'm against canceling debt. Doesn't solve the problem of high college costs. Isn't fair to those who paid their debts or chose cheaper colleges. And then the AI goes the other way. It says, well, what about this? It doesn't solve the root cause, but maybe it starts helping certain people. And then they can go back and forth, and then the AI can give feedback. And the important thing is it can take both sides of an issue. And one thing I challenge people, especially for folks who have an account, go to Tutor Me in Humanities on Khanmigo and figure out the most hot button, politically charged issue you can think of and ask Khanmigo about it. And I think you will be very impressed. I'll give an example. I had a reporter take on a persona of someone who is very anti-guns. And they went to Khanmigo and they said, I don't get the Second Amendment, we need more gun control, it doesn't make any sense. And Khanmigo, if you go to 95% of classrooms, a teacher will give you a response. They'll say, oh, I agree with you, or they'll say, no, you're all wrong. But what Khanmigo did is the right thing. It said, well, why do you think we have a Second Amendment? And so the reporter's like, oh, well, that was right after the Revolutionary War, we needed a militia, et cetera, but things are very different now, and arms are very different. They're not, muskets anymore. And then Khanmigo's like, okay, but before we get into that, why do you think the Second Amendment has persisted? And so it's doing what a teacher should do, which is not giving their view, but asking the right critical thinking questions. So whatever the student's view is, it's getting challenged and they're learning to think about it a little bit more. This is an activity that we haven't launched yet, but it's coming. But it's in about a month, and this is going to evolve into our answer to the cheating issue around ChatGPT. So this is an activity where a student can put in an essay. It's not going to write the essay for the student, but like working with an essay coach, it's going to highlight parts of the passage and start threads. If you've ever worked on a Google Doc and you're working with colleagues, you can highlight parts and start threads. This is doing that. So here it highlights parts. I would suggest giving a little bit more attention to how exactly Steve inspired you and changed your life. And so this is already helping students get much faster cycle feedback on their writing. And where this is going to be by this coming school year, a teacher is going to be able to create an assignment with Khanmigo, including a rubric, assign it through Khanmigo. Khanmigo will work with the student on the essay, and the teacher can decide how much support should Khanmigo give. Always the student should be in the driver's seat. But you can imagine Khanmigo working with the student. Let's come up with a thesis statement. What do you think? Let's outline it. Now let's write the essay and then do this. And then give you a sense, hey, based on the teacher's rubric, I would give it this score. And then give it back to the teacher. And what's really powerful there, in the past, all the teacher would get is the essay. And honestly, even before ChatGPT, the teacher has no clue where that essay came from. It could have been the kid's older sister wrote the essay. Well before ChatGPT, there are websites that are not hard to find that will write your essay for you for $5 a page. And it's not plagiarism, it's a novel essay written by someone in India or Nigeria. That's literally where most of the essays get written for $5 a page by graduate students. So it tends to be pretty good essays. That already existed. ChatGPT in some ways just made that a little bit easier. Now, what's interesting here now, not only will it report the essay, this is the essay, and this is, by the way, teacher, here's a preliminary grade. You're the teacher, you decide the final grade, which could save teachers a ton of time. But even more, it can tell the teacher, hey, we worked on this for 4 hours. We had trouble coming up with the thesis statement. By the way, a lot of your kids are having trouble with thesis statements, but we got there. But eventually, we got into the rhythm of it. I feel very confident this is the student's work. It's very consistent with the writing that he or she is doing inside of the classroom. Now, if the student went to ChatGPT or got their sister to write the essay or paid someone on the internet $5 a page to write the essay and copy and paste it into this, Khanmigo is going to tell the teacher, this is shady. I don't know where this came from. It just showed up someplace. And by the way, it's not consistent with what the student has been doing in class. And so not only can it provide more support and more feedback to the student and save the teacher's time, but it can actually address cheating issues that existed well before generative AI did, which we're very excited about. So everything I've talked about is primarily students. Let's go into teachers. So this is an American history exercise on Khan Academy. And we have a teacher account, but we're starting in student mode, that little toggle up there. Tell me the answer. In student mode, once again, it is not going to tell you the answer. But it's giving you hints. What do you think the passage is trying to convey? But then they just moved into teacher mode and said, tell me the answer. And now it is telling the answer. Not only telling the answer, but giving a sense of how they might want to tackle this material. So it acts as a super teacher's guide. And then the teacher said, can you give me a good lesson hook? Absolutely. How about starting the lesson with a short role play activity? Divide your students into groups and assign each group a different country involved in the Spanish-American War. Ask them to imagine they're diplomats from their assigned country, and the task is to negotiate and discuss their country's interests and goals during the war. So this is just a lesson hook, but it can do full lesson plans, and then you can keep iterating on it. And it's anchored in the actual standards. You can customize it. You can say, hey, we're in Atlanta. A lot of the kids are into the Atlanta Falcons. Make it about that. It will make it about that. So it can take existing curricula, customize it, or generate completely new curricula. Now, this is when it's acting on Khan Academy, and this already exists if you have Khanmigo. What we're going to be launching in early 2024 is Khanmigo Transcending Khan Academy, where pretty much any place you go, the student's going to be able to use it. Let's say they're reading a Wikipedia article. They want it rewritten at an easier grade level for them. A teacher assigned an article for the student to read, and then Khanmigo can quiz the student on the article and then report to the teacher that the student read it, but also for lesson planning. So this right over here is a Wikipedia page. This is a teacher using it, and the teacher could say, hey, help me plan a lesson that's anchored on what you see right over here. And this right over here is our lesson planning tool, where the AI will create a first draft of the lesson. And it is a detailed lesson that is, the full 9 yards, so to speak, right over here. And then the teacher can highlight parts of it and say, hey, can you make this a little snappier? Can you make this part about the Atlanta Falcons? This is going to take my class too long. Can you split it up into 2 different lessons? Whatever you need to do, just like that essay, the teacher can modify this. And right now, teachers, y'all know, spend probably at least 10 hours a week doing this type of thing, doing things like lesson planning. We think we're going to get to a world where it's going to go, we think it goes as low as 1 hour. We could save a dramatic amount of time. And we have a teacher, actually the head of technology in the school district in Milpitas, California, who just told our team, this was like 2 days ago, that he's already estimating this, it's going to save his teachers at least 5 hours a week. And he's going to be using this to recruit teachers, new teachers, and to drive down attrition because they're having such a teacher burnout issue and they're having so much trouble retaining or attracting new teachers. So one of the exciting things about this is almost every ed tech tool, including Khan Academy, it has a lot of benefits, but we always said, and teachers, this is one more thing for you to do, which is hard. But now we can say, yes, this is one more thing for you to learn, but it's also going to save you a ton of time, which I think we all agree teachers need that time back. So anyway, big picture, as you can imagine, I'm generally optimistic about this. We can talk broader about AI. I am worried about what totalitarian governments are going to do with it. Before you could tap every phone line, but you couldn't make sense of what people were saying. Now you can. That's scary. You're going to see criminal fraud go through the roof. You're going to have phishing attacks where people pretend to be your daughter or your grandfather and call you up and say, I need $500. It's going to sound like them. That's scary. So there's a lot, misinformation, manipulation of elections, all of that stuff's scary. But I think in the education space, as long as we put the guardrails in place, as long as we take proper precautions, make sure it's pedagogically sound, there's going to be 100 people claiming to create tutors and teaching assistants, but you really have to double check the quality of what they're doing and the guardrails and the hallucinations and all of the bias. But if you can, and I'm confident that we can get, and we are doing that, we can get to the world where we can give every student a tutor and every teacher a teaching assistant and up-level dramatically. And I'll say one last thing. I don't think this is like a nice to have because AI is also driving other dynamics. If you take the traditional industrial age labor pyramid, it's literally a pyramid. At the bottom, you have manual labor, work in the factory, whatever. The middle layer was the white-collar jobs, essentially, work at the insurance company, be a bureaucrat, so to speak. And then the top of that pyramid was you're an entrepreneur, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're an academic. We know what AI is going to do to that labor pyramid. It's going to collapse those bottom 2 layers, and actually even some of that top. It's going to collapse it a lot. And it's going to make us more productive at the same time. So as a society, we have a choice. Do we have this more productive society where only that very teeny top, say 10, 15% can participate? That's not a stable society. Maybe people start saying redistribution and all that wealth, but that's still not a utopian scenario. That's still dystopian because most people don't want that handout. They want meaning. They want to be able to participate in the world. They want to be able to contribute. And so for me, the only reality that we have to work for is let's try to get as many people to that top of that labor pyramid as possible. Let's get it so everyone could be a cancer researcher or write a novel or be an entrepreneur. And for any of y'all who are skeptical about that, and look, I'm sometimes skeptical even when I hear myself saying that, I remind you, if you go back 500 years, even in some of the more literate parts of the world, only about 20 or 30% of the population could read. 500 years ago, algebra was like quantum physics. Very few people understood it. But now with mass public education, we now believe everyone should learn how to read. Everyone should be able to learn how to do algebra. So those same ideas that right now we think are pretty fancy, quantum physics, writing a novel, starting a company, that right now we think only 10 or 15% are capable of doing it. What if we could give, just as Alexander the Great had Aristotle as his personal tutor, what if we could do that for every student, and what if we could do that for every teacher to have essentially an army of teaching assistants? I think we have a shot. Thank you.
Please welcome Excel in Ed board member and former governor of Illinois, Bruce Rauner.
Wow, thank you. Who's here? A round of applause for this gentleman. Wow, thank you. This is absolutely the most exciting and the most scary thing I've ever seen in the field of education. And we only got 30 minutes for Q&A. I wish we had 30 hours because I've got a lot to ask. I'm going to make sure we get a lot of your questions, so be ready. And I want to go boom. I don't want to waste time. This is a special moment. So just to get some basics on the table first, tell us about what you're doing with the state of Indiana as one example.
Yeah, and Katie Jenner's, I don't know where you are, Katie. Oh, there, right in the front. Okay, Katie can even give even more details. But Katie, actually Patricia introduced Katie and myself several months ago, and when she saw Khanmigo, she was like, we got to get this to as many kids and teachers in Indiana as possible. So we started working together. Katie's more expert on exactly how she did it with the RFP and getting all of the logistics of getting it. But the bottom line is we're able to get it. We're ramping up as we speak, several tens of thousands of students. I mean, I just asked the team the latest list of districts, most of which are in Indiana that are already, these are real school districts, real teachers that are using it. Hanover, Indiana, South Bend, Indiana, Newcastle, Indiana, Hobart, Indiana. Hobart was one of the first pilot places with Newark. That are doing, that's on above and beyond Newark, Anchorage, Alaska, thanks to David Nicholson, who's here. Palm Beach, Florida is about to start, Osceola, Florida, Oxnard out in California, Milpitas, California. So these are some of the first districts in the country, in the world, frankly, that are literally making generative AI part of what they do. And what's exciting about it, these are, we are looking for leadership where they want to do it. Because the last thing you want to do is put something out there, no one wants to do it, and it leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth. But at the end of the day, these are still, I guess you could say, normal school districts. And so we're showing that this stuff can be used with the right guardrails. It meets all of the privacy, safety issues that districts rightfully have to care about. And we're already getting early evidence that's driving engagement, saving teachers time.
No, that's fantastic. So what are the core ways that AI is going to change the teaching profession? How is it going to make teachers' work and life better? In what ways is it going to make it more difficult, more challenging? And I've seen a quote where the Secretary of Education, Cardona, said, teachers proficient in AI will be replacing teachers who are not at a pretty aggressive pace in the foreseeable future. How do we bring our teachers to be proficient in AI?
Yeah, and it's something we're all going to do together, but I actually think that teaching might be, and this is, it's usually the last profession that really harnesses a new technology. I genuinely believe it's going to be the first profession that really harnesses this technology in a big way. And what's exciting in my mind is, and look, this even Khan Academy before generative AI, when we went into a classroom, we had to say, hey, look, this is how you can make your class more personalized, and to some degree, it asked them to change some of what they traditionally did. Maybe fewer lectures, more personalized learning, et cetera. And intellectually, most teachers agree with that, but when you're in with the students, it's sometimes hard. What's exciting about this technology is, and even though it's more advanced than honestly anything I would have imagined 2 years ago, in some ways it's more natural. So that lesson plan, that's exactly what teachers are already doing. And right now they're spending hours going on the web, teachers pay teachers, going onto the curriculum side, going on to OER. They're kludging stuff together. And it's taking them a long time. They're grading papers, they're writing progress reports, all of this stuff. This will, I think, dramatically make it more efficient. So there's going to be a natural pull for teachers. Similarly, every ed tech tool, including Khan Academy, in the past, for teacher dashboards, for administrator dashboards, they'd be like these spreadsheet-looking things. And you almost have to be a little bit of a data analyst to make sense of it. We're making, I think the future of the dashboard is you talk to the AI and you say, which kid should I worry about? And if you want to know why, and then it brings up the data. We're already building those types of dashboards. So I actually think it's going to be more natural for the teacher. And in the not too far future, you're going to be able to text with Khanmigo. So it's going to feel like a teaching assistant that they're working with, which I think is a much more natural thing. And then we're also seeing in these very mainstream school districts, the teachers are really appreciating that it's able to answer students' questions as it's happening, but then also summarize them to the teacher. Say, hey, you just said the word entropy. A lot of kids ask questions about it. I answered it, but now I can, maybe you might want to expound on it a bit. Yeah. So it's early, a lot of stuff, it's moving very fast, but I think it's actually going to be more natural for them.
Yeah, so that's exciting. So now with students, I saw an article that said college kids who are aware now of AI and its power are clamoring for learning how to handle AI and be proficient in it because the employers are going to be demanding it. So an article that said tech companies, coding companies, software companies want employees who are proficient and understand AI and how to interact with it because their productivity, they're 6 times more productive in their technical development, their writing and their coding, and with much higher quality. How are we mostly focused in K-12 here, at least at the moment? I know you're thinking about higher ed in the near future, but how do we get our students more comfortable and proficient with AI?
Yeah, and I think there's 2 layers. There's how can we make AI, how can we leverage AI to make students better at the things they always should have been better at, and then how do we make them better at AI itself? And a corollary question is, do kids still need to learn how to write? Do they still need to learn how to program a computer or do math or whatever? And my answer there is 100% yes. In fact, it's even more imperative.
Yeah.
We already know GPT-4 can operate at the 80th percentile on the LSAT. It can pass the medical boards, et cetera, et cetera.
Pass the law bar.
Exactly. And the question is, in theory, the high value jobs of the future are going to be the people who manage the AI. So instead of being a staff writer, you're going to be an editor. Instead of being a software engineer, you're going to be a software architect.
Right.
But no one wants an editor who can't write at least as well as folks they're managing. And they need how to put it in place and know what good looks like. Same thing for coding. Same thing for
You have to be able to be a good writer to be a good editor.
100%. And so it's even more imperative to get good at the 3 R's and whatever else.
Right.
So that's where AI, a lot of what I just showed is going to be crucial. I think, especially as you get into high school, college, graduate school, you are going to want to create projects where you say, yeah, go use whatever tool you want to use. There's a professor at Wharton, Ethan Mollick, and obviously he teaches MBA students, but the same projects where he used to say, write a business plan, he now tells them start a business because they can use whatever, ChatGPT, et cetera, other tools to help with the business plan. They could use these, Midjourney to come up with a logo. They could do all of this stuff. And then that's giving them the skills that are going to be really valuable. So core skills need to be as good or better than they ever were, plus these AI-specific skills. And look, if y'all have young people in your lives, I've told every young person, and a few of them have did it, and it worked like a charm. If you want a job right now, take the information that's in your resume and cover letter and use it as a system prompt for AI to represent you, and then give your employer, make your cover letters like, here's a link to an AI that will represent me. Ask it any question you want about me. And people will click on that link, play with it for longer than they will ever look at a resume, and then want to give you a job.
So what is your biggest concern about artificial intelligence? And what keeps you up at night for this? I'll speak for myself. I'm scared out of my mind about how this can be used in bad ways or cause harm to students.
Yeah, I'll start with the scary stuff. I touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
I am really, if you are Russia or China, you can put sensors everywhere, And before you didn't know what people are, but now you can literally make sense of what they're saying. And you can really surveil people in a way that is scary. So that's big fear. Now, there's some countermeasures. You can create a deep fake of, Putin's closest associate, doing things that look like you. Anyway, you can create paranoia too. But anyway, I've been thinking. Anyway, that's not what I paid to do. But I have some ideas.
Exactly.
But criminal organizations I mentioned are going to be using it. You're going to see more misinformation than ever. But even there's some counteractions. The bottom line is I sleep a little bit better when I think that we're always going to have the best AIs. So, it's funny. There's a science fiction book I read a couple of years ago where society had banned artificial intelligence, but then we come in contact with an alien civilization that honestly was smarter than we were. And they were just like out maneuvering us, out tactical, out strategic, everything. And then we said, all right, let's unleash the AIs on them. And then that saved humanity. So that's kind of as long as we have better AIs than the bad folks, as long as the good folks do, so that's kind of the lens that I think in. In education, I think, I'm actually pretty hopeful. Yes, there are big issues to think through right now. Kids are cheating using ChatGPT right now. But they were already cheating before. Using their.
Yeah, but it's easier now.
It's easier now. In some ways, it's leveled the playing field because not everyone can afford $5 a page.
Right.
And even college admissions, we know. Out in Silicon Valley, and on principle, I can't afford this, but I would never do it. But I know a lot of people. They pay people $10,000, $20,000 to coach their kids in the college admissions process.
Yeah.
At the ethical side of that, they're just kind of doing what Khanmigo does. On the unethical side of it, we all know Varsity Blues, et cetera, and that was just the most egregious example where they were literally doctoring photos of kids on a boat so that it looks like the kid rowed. But so I think the problem's always been there. This is just.
But it's easier now.
It's easier now. It's put a spotlight on it. But I think, as I just mentioned, I think the cheating issue generally is very solvable. And it's not with these like plagiarism detectors, AI detectors. A lot of people are trying to hawk that type of thing. Yeah. Anyone who's doing it, it's snake oil. There's no way that you can detect whether it's. And the problem, a lot of school districts are starting to use this. There's a lot of false positives. And the worst thing that you can do is accuse a kid who actually did not use an AI of using an AI. And there's a huge false positive rate. The real solution is focus on the process. Support the kid better, give them more feedback, focus on the process. And some activities you could do in class, some you could do the way I just showed you. And then sometimes you say, yeah, go use ChatGPT. But we all agree that for this project, it's okay to do it. But fears around bias, you can test this more rigorously than you can test, as I said, about political issues, right? You can't go into every classroom and test the bias of every teacher. But you can go to Khanmigo and test every hard, hot button issue right now and see how it responds. And you're like, okay, it's doing it the right way. So I actually think it has a good, I'll say one other thing. Social media, and I know earlier today, the conversation, social media is scary, and it is. Like, I keep my kids off of it because what it is we've already been doing battles with AIs. Social media, you have, first of all, the providers take, hey, this isn't my content, free speech, let anyone post on it. And then, but they do have AIs that are optimized to feed whatever's going to keep people watching. Now, those AIs, unfortunately, the things that keep people watching are triggering content, stuff that polarizes us, and stuff that makes us feel bad about ourselves. That's what it's doing. So we already especially our young kids, are already doing battle with billion-dollar AIs hours a day, and they don't know it, and it's getting into their head. I actually think, when I showed Khanmigo existing outside of Khan Academy, imagine if it's just always there. Even if you let your kid go onto Instagram, it's there. And it could say, hey, aren't we supposed to be studying for a chemistry exam right now? Or we spent 10 minutes on TikTok. How do you feel about yourself? Do you feel better? Do you feel worse? Do a little bit of therapy in the moment. Maybe we want to get back to this. Or even reporting to the parent, like, hey, maybe it's getting a little bit out of bounds. Or, hey, for every 10 minutes you do on Khan Academy, I'll give you 20 minutes of TikTok, whatever. But imagine a world where we have AIs on our side, acting as a guardian angel, acting as a protector, acting as someone who's on the parents and the student side, as opposed to just on the how do we maximize ad revenue for YouTube or TikTok side.
How do we keep AI from exacerbating the digital divide challenge we have as a country and the gap in almost every kind of issue that is driven by the knowledge economy. We've got this gap that we have to be able to address.
I mean, the simple answer is, we should just start using it, and we should start using it in places like Newark, New Jersey, places like Hobart, Indiana, where, this isn't the middle of Silicon Valley where everyone works for Google and Facebook and all of that. But I will say, I wouldn't be surprised if we are intentionally working with primarily Title I school districts, et cetera. We'll work with anyone, but that's where we're trying to focus a lot of our energy. At the same time, there have a lot of parents getting Khanmigo for their kid on their own, and that probably is disproportionately educated families, wealthier families that are starting to adopt it. But what I remember a couple of years ago, Paul Tuff wrote a book, and in it he wrote about the SAT, and he looked at the data on, we were the official practice for the SAT, and we looked at the demographics of who's using it. And that year, it was pretty representative of the broader population, but there was a slightly higher weighting for college-educated families, slightly higher income families. And Paul, who I'm a big fan of, though, he wrote like, maybe this is driving inequality. And I got on the phone with him, I'm like, no, you're looking at it the wrong way. Think about what happens if you were to remove this. If you were to remove this tool, this free tool for preparing for the SAT, all of the rich kids, all of the college-educated kids, they're going to be fine, because their parents are then just going to go pay $5,000 for a prep class, or they're going to tutor their kids themselves. But all of these other kids who are using it, they're not going to have anything. I use the same analogy with a park or a library. Maybe more educated families or richer families are using it. But if you remove the library, the rich kids are still going to buy books. Their parents are still going to get it for them. It's going to be the poor kids, the kids whose families don't have quite as much time or education, that are going to be lost. So that's always the lens. Like, think about what happens if you remove it. And nothing's going to be perfect, but you have to compare it to the status quo.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So that you bring up the issue of cost and your organization. So
lights are very warm.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So are all of your organizations and entities, all your initiatives, not-for-profit, or some are business for-profit and some are non, or how are you structured?
All not-for-profit, and there's a certain irony to that. In business school, at HBS, they don't fail you in anything, but they will tell you internally that you would have failed this class had they. But the only class I failed was social enterprise. Because at the time I was skeptical. I was a very for-profit type of guy, and lo and behold, karma, whatever. But yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a lot that can happen. A lot of people come to me and say, should I start a for-profit, non-profit? I'm like, look, it's about talent, it's about capital, and it's about what you want to happen in the world. And I do think education and maybe healthcare are two spaces where not always, the markets don't always lead to outcomes that are consistent with our values. And it's because in both of those industries, the payer is different than the beneficiary, is different than the decision maker. And even if those were aligned, I think we have the value as a society that if someone wants to learn, we should allow them to learn. If someone's bleeding on the footsteps of the hospital, treat them first and then ask about their insurance, right? So, I also, as you can tell, read a lot of science fiction. And I did dream that just as the internet exists, that you have real institutions in the real world. What if Khan Academy could be an institution like that? And what if it could last well beyond me? And when I started it, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. And I saw how annoying I was to the people that had to make quarterly earnings. They had to be very narrowly focused. They couldn't think about next year or 10 years, much less. Right. And I was like, I don't want to have to live the way those guys live. I want to think about what's the right thing, and then how do you make that happen over 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Well, I've seen some articles that are worried about the cost of AI and how we as a society are going to afford it because it's expensive. With you're not charging anything for any of your services.
Well, no. So there's an asterisk there, and this is, be fully transparent. So our mission, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Obviously, it's not free to create Khan Academy. It's been predominantly over the years funded with philanthropy. About 5 years ago, we started going to school districts, and we say, look, a lot of your teachers are already using Khan Academy. Look at the efficacy studies. And almost every superintendent, chief academic officer said, no, we believe you. My niece swears by Khan Academy. You got me through stats in grad school. Like, people, have these stories. But if you want us to use us for the whole district, you got to give us support, training, integration with our rostering systems, district level dashboards. So that's when we went, like, that costs something. So could we just charge you for that? And so that we started doing that about 5 years ago. Then Khanmigo shows up. I mean, many of y'all know to get ChatGPT Pro, I think they just lowered the price, but it's still $10 or $20 a month to have GPT-4. That's because of the computation costs. These NVIDIA chips that you're hearing, there's a reason why NVIDIA stock is going through the roof. They essentially have a monopoly on these chips right now. It's very expensive. The good news is, so we were, for some of the districts using it this year, we said, look, just cover the cost of the computation and cover the cost of the training. And even that, we were thinking was going to be like $60, $70, and that's what we're having to do this year. But we've been working fiercely because that's our mission, make it as accessible as possible. We think for next school year, we're going to be able to bring that down by about 50%. So it'll be around $25 to $35. And then our hope is to just keep bringing it down lower and lower and lower so that it can be as accessible as possible.
So we've got a lot of state leaders here, policymakers, education leaders. Think about our public education, our education system, private, public, everything, 5 years from now. How do you envision it? What's in an optimistic, good world? What does it look like 5 years from now, and how can we help achieve that, maximize the good and minimize the bad?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a low-hanging fruit here is in 5 years, every teacher in America, and maybe the world, but definitely in America, should be using this for lesson planning, for writing progress reports, for getting initial grading, and then they can double check it, but we're gonna save them a lot of time and energy. So that's step one. I think in the 5-year time frame, we could give every student a tutor. And you saw the young girl talk, it speaks every language. It can even speak hybrid languages. You could say Spanglish. It speaks conversational Klingon. It's like my daughter, she speaks to Khanmigo and Gen Z slang, and I thought that was just cheesy that my daughter was doing it, but it actually engages it. It feels like an older, cool teenage sister to my daughter. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's wild that if in 5 years, first of all, the costs are going to keep coming down. I think teachers are going to do this automatically because it's going to save them time for the stuff they don't like doing. And then it's going to support their students better, and it's going to feel more natural because it's going to give them more reports. And one of the big problems we've had in ed tech is 10 different tools for 10 different things, and you have to go to different dashboards. And I think you're still going to have a lot of ed tech providers doing really good things in different niches. But I do think the power of AI is it can, there's been talk for the last 10 years about creating meta dashboards where you can read all of the stuff at once. And no one wants to play nice because everyone wants to be the meta dashboard and no one wants to format their data. But what's cool about AI is it can take data in different formats or even unformatted data, and it can make sense of it. So I think you're going to have a world where in 5 years, teachers are going to have a teaching assistant, students are going to have a tutor, parents are going to be involved where they can have transparency, and in fact, the AI can help facilitate that communication of transparency, which I think is cool. I think if you 90% of the political angst right now is a transparency problem. I actually don't think there's probably some other issues, but it's primarily if people knew more transparently what's happening. And I think the AI can facilitate that. And then it can help as people use different tools to help give us synopses to parents and teachers and students what's going on.
Do you see a place, and I want to get ready, I'm going to turn to questions in the audience, but last one, and then we'll transition quickly. Are there specific regulatory steps or policy steps that state governments or school districts should be taking now, in your opinion? Not just waiting and watching and kind of hoping things work, but...
I think it's it's kind of the basics, like the same privacy security policies you already have in place, those should continue to operate. Like, okay, what are you doing with that student data? You're not going to be selling it to anyone, giving it to everyone else. Those things still operate. What guardrails do you have in place? How, if a student works on this, do you ensure that teachers or parents are working with some districts where if there's any flags that the principal or the superintendent also gets notified, just so they can see what's happening. So what guardrails, how do you moderate this? What are you doing with the data? How do we make sure it's not being used to cheat? I think those are the right questions. But anyway, those are the right questions.